question of what is an out-of-body experience, I think, has two key layers to it. There is one side of the question looks at what we experience as individuals. So classically, someone will feel that they come out of body, almost like a living spirit, that they drift up into the air above themselves, often travel over distance, so will maybe pass through walls or move to other locations in the physical world, and sometimes in other levels of reality too. So that's the experiential aspect of it. There's a multi-sensory experience where you're feeling things, seeing things, travelling, and feel that your centre of consciousness, your sense of self, is at another location to where your physical body is located. That would be the experiential side. Then we have the question of what is actually going on. So that's where things become much more technical and much more complicated, because that then brings in the question of, is it purely taking place in the mind? Is there some kind of spirit or astral body or energy body? Or is it somehow a combination of an inner experience, i.e. a construct created by the brain, but also some information coming externally? That's where I tend to lean more at the moment, is the idea that it's a combination of factors. There are factors that are brain-based, that are to do with a construct, to do with the brain creating things, but then there are also elements to out-of-body experience, which is often referred to as veridical elements, that are objective information about the external world. And when those kinds of elements come into the experience, it's very hard to say that we're purely dealing with a brain-based phenomena. But there are definitely elements of out-of-body experiences that are also clearly related to brain activity and related to the psychology or the mental activity of the individual. So we get to this situation where there's a combination of both going on. And I think that is the best explanation, because we do also find that as an out-of-body experience progresses and as an individual has more out-of-body experiences over time, they tend to find that the experience changes. Often the sense of having a secondary body, which is not as common as is often believed by the general population, the experience of having a secondary body seems to only be in the range of maybe around 30% of people. So it's not the most common form of out-of-body experience. But those who do experience that will often find that over time the body diminishes. This is what happened with me. In my very early experiences, when I was in my teens, I would experience being in a secondary body, a sort of energy body, often sort of bluish in colour, and then over time I would start to experience more of a travelling consciousness, which is a more common descriptor. Sometimes people experience being a sphere of energy, like a kind of ball of energy, where they're even seeing 360 is sometimes described. So the experience can take many different forms, and I think this is because we're dealing with something that is partly constructed from our thoughts, our emotions, our fears, our sense of reality, our sense of self, probably to do with our body schema as well, which relates to some of the scientific theories. There's an idea that the temporoparietal junction of the brain is responsible for out-of-body experiences. I don't feel that that's a full explanation, because it doesn't account for the complexity and the multi-layered levels that people experience in out-of-body experiences, and also it doesn't account for the veridical elements, and it also doesn't account for the other studies that have been done that look at brain activity, for example, in an fMRI scanner. When you look at someone having an out-of-body experience in an fMRI scanner, you find that a whole range of areas of the brain are active. Some other studies have found something very similar to that as well. So it seems when you look at the full range of science that we have, that the brain is active in many different ways and is actually active as if someone were experiencing something physically. So as if you were moving around in the world physically, certain aspects of your brain to do with movement, to do with visual perception, to do with kinetic activity, all of those kinds of things would be represented in activity in the brain. And that's essentially what you get when someone is having an out-of-body experience. The activity in their brain matches what they are experiencing within the out-of-body experience. So that seems to be roughly what's going on. We need more science on all of these aspects, but as our current understanding stands, that's what we tend to see. So that leads me to this conclusion that we're in this situation where we're partly dealing with a brain state and partly dealing with psi or non-local perception or essentially psychic information that's coming from an external source and being translated by the brain. You could compare it to how vision works, that we have our eyes, our ordinary senses, the light and the information comes into the eyes, and then the brain translates that information into a coherent representation of the world around us. It's not a literal thing, it's not a stream of information that's going straight into the brain and is unchanged, unfiltered. The brain is adapting that information into a form that we can use in an understandable way. I think that is probably what's happening with an out-of-body experience to some degree as well, that we are dealing with a translation of the information into a coherent form. Whether that's purely happening because of the brain or whether that's happening because of some other form of mind or consciousness, I don't know. But what seems to be happening is there is some kind of alteration of the information, some kind of translation. And it seems that as we develop our ability to work more with out-of-body experiences, to work more with meditation and basically adjusting our sense of self and our ability to perceive and our ability to have a still mind, as we develop those abilities, what happens is the accuracy and the consistency of the experience, of the perceptions in the out-of-body experience, become more objective, more veridical. And I think that's a sign that we are filtering out the psychological aspect, we're filtering out the mental noise, if you like, and we're getting to a more consistent, pure signal of what the out-of-body experience is. So essentially my thinking on what might actually be going on is that we are dealing with a non-local consciousness, that we're dealing with an extension beyond the mind. You could call it the extended mind, to reference the work of someone like Rupert Sheldrake. We also have different theories. For example, Brian Josephson, who won the Nobel Prize for Physics, has an idea of what he calls biological utilization of quantum non-locality, which is essentially a biological system, i.e. the brain is utilizing or using non-local perception. So it's bringing in information and the brain is able to then work with that. We also have Sir Roger Penrose, who put forward the idea of orchestrated objective reduction theory. In that theory, we have this idea that the microtubules or low-level structures of the cells within the body and the brain may be entangled in some way on a quantum level, and that is what allows for consciousness to arise or even to have non-local consciousness. So these are not woo-woo references to quantum physics. These are genuine scientists, as I mentioned, who have even won the Nobel Prize in Physics. Real scientists who have looked at these areas and feel that there is reason to take psi or non-local perception seriously, and it allows for a framework within our current understanding of science that would allow for out-of-body experiences. I think that probably there is more to it, and there are probably elements that we have that we haven't discovered yet and that we will discover in the future. But for now, I think that is a model that makes sense in terms of what might actually be going on.